My uncle starts off by saying it was North Jersey. Tony Bananas and his crew. Tony's making a play to take over the family, and the Barracuda is with him. Phil Testa shakes his head, says something in Italian, and slams his fist into the table, then says, "Okay, Nick. So what happens next? You let New York get to the bottom of this fucking plot. Figure out what they're going to do about it. But in the meantime, you step up. You were the underboss. You now become acting boss. We sit back and we wait for New York." Phil Testa proposed a toast in Angie's memory, and we all toasted. And then my uncle proposed a toast to the future. We all toasted to that as well. While we're eating, Phil Testa says, "If I get straightened out with this thing, meaning if New York makes him the boss, you guys are all getting made. Meaning me, Chucky, Salvie, and Lawrence." We all toasted to that.
While Scarfo, Leonetti, the Testas, and the Merlino brothers were busy toasting the past, present, and future at Caponigro's, Antonio Caponigro and his crew were toasting to a very different future at Caponigro's club in Newark, the 311 Club. That toast saw Tony Bananas as the new Don, and the Barracuda, Frank Sindone, as his underboss.
See, Caponigro thought he had gotten the okay to kill Ange. When he went to Funzi Tieri, Funzi told him that he had gotten the okay from the commission. But Tieri, he never presented it to the commission. No fucking way. They would have never sanctioned that fucking hit. For one, Ange was close with Paul Castellano, who had the top seat on the commission. And two, our family was aligned with the Gambinos. If Funzi, who's with the Genovese, comes to the commission and says, "Tony Bananas wants to kill Ange," Castellano would have known it was designed to empower the Genovese. Castellano wasn't stupid. So, when Caponigro is talking to Funzi Tieri about killing Ange, he thinks he's talking to the boss, because everyone thought that Tieri was the boss. But he wasn't. The Chin was. So, Tieri stokes Caponigro along, and all the while, Tieri, the Chin, and Bobby Manna are manipulating the whole fucking thing. They want Ange dead, so that my uncle gets the unions.
While the ambitious Caponigro double-crossed Bruno, the ruthless old-school Brooklyn-bred gangster, Tieri, triple-crossed Caponigro. Within a few days of Bruno's killing, Caponigro was called to a meeting inside a dingy social club in New York City's Greenwich Village that served as the primary headquarters of the Genovese crime family. Caponigro thought he was being called to the sit-down, to be named the new boss of the Philadelphia mob. And once again, Tony Bananas thought wrong. Joining the 67-year-old Caponigro on this fateful trip was his 64-year-old brother-in-law, Alfred Freddie Salerno, who was made to wait at the bar of a nearby Italian restaurant as Caponigro was ushered into a private meeting with the hierarchy of the Genovese crime family, which included the cigar-chomping Anthony Fat Tony Salerno, the treacherous Frank Funzi Tieri, the underworld power broker Bobby Manna, and the supreme leader of the Genovese crime family himself, Vincent the Chin Gigante.
So Bobby Manna, he tells me and my uncle what happened next. Caponigro is called in. He sits down in a chair, facing Fat Tony, Tieri, Bobby Manna, and the Chin. They're all seated across from him, behind the table. The Chin says, "We're here today to find out who gave you permission to whack out your boss, Angelo Bruno. Can you tell us?" So, Caponigro looks over at Tieri, and Tieri looks back at him, stone-faced. Caponigro says, "Funzi told me that I had the okay, that the commission approved the hit. Right, Funzi? You told me that I had the okay. Right? The commission approved the hit? That's what you told me. Funzi? Funzi, that's what you told me." So the Chin says, "Frank, what's he talking about? I told you to straighten it out, not kill him."
Sensing he had been double-crossed, Caponigro began pleading for his life with the men, but was already being beaten by Genovese enforcers who had suddenly appeared in the room. At the direction of Vincent the Chin Gigante, Caponigro was brutally and unmercifully tortured, sodomized, and murdered, sending a powerful message to the entire United States underworld. The unsanctioned killing of a boss would not be tolerated, certainly not by the likes of Vincent the Chin Gigante, who was now in prime position to be head of the commission.
The next day, after they killed Caponigro in New York, Blackie Napoli comes down to Atlantic City. He tells us Tony's dead. His brother-in-law, Freddie, too. He then says to my uncle, "Bobby wants to see you and Phil Testa in New York tomorrow." So my uncle calls for Salvie to come down from Philly. He tells him, "Tell your father me and him gotta take a drive tomorrow." So my uncle and Phil Testa go up to New York and meet with the same group that killed Caponigro. It's basically the same setup, except this time the Chin tells Phil Testa that the commission has decided he's now the boss of the Philly mob, and that the commission wants him to name my uncle either underboss or consigliere, and that the commission wants anyone and everyone involved in Angie's death to be identified and killed. He also tells him that Blackie Napoli is to remain as boss of the family's North Jersey operation. Now, what Phil Testa doesn't know, but my uncle does, is that the main reason Ange is dead, and now Caponigro too, are the 4 guys sitting across from him in this room. They set it all up. Now they want everyone who had a hand in it to be killed. This is how treacherous they are. To them, this is all about money and power. It's business, nothing personal.
Law enforcement officials today were still trying to determine the motives for the gangland-style slaying of 2 Essex County mob figures. The bullet-riddled bodies of 67-year-old Antonio Tony Bananas Caponigro of Short Hills and Alfred Salerno, 64, of Verona, were both found April 18th in the South Bronx, but authorities only identified their bodies yesterday after fingerprint analysis. Caponigro was thought to be the head of gambling and loan sharking operations along the North Jersey waterfront. His body was found in a trunk of a stolen car, riddled with bullets and stab wounds and littered with $20 bills. Salerno, his hands and feet tied behind him, was shot several times. His body was found in another section of the South Bronx.
A few days later, Phil Testa calls a meeting for the upper brass of the Philadelphia mob in a back room at Virgilio's, the popular old city restaurant he owned, which also served as his headquarters. In attendance were longtime reputed South Philadelphia Bruno mob captains, Santo Big Santo Idione, Joseph Joe Scafidi, Alfred Freddy Aizi, John Johnny Capello, and the newly appointed boss of the family's North Jersey operation, Ralph Blackie Napoli. Nicky Scarfo would arrive at the meeting with his longtime pal, Louis Bobby Manna, the Genovese family consigliere and mob power broker, who had played a significant behind-the-scenes role in the deaths of both Bruno and Caponigro. Manna's attendance was designed to both legitimize Testa as the family's new boss and to solidify the relationship between the new Bruno family leadership and the Genovese crime family, which Manna represented. At the meeting, Phil Testa announced that Pete Casella would serve as underboss and that Nicky Scarfo would serve as consigliere.
Now, my uncle doesn't say anything, but he was expecting to be underboss, not consigliere. Pete Casella was an old-time guy who was around Ange. He had recently gotten out of jail for dealing drugs. My uncle never fooled with drugs. The rules of La Cosa Nostra forbids it. Now, we have a drug dealer as our underboss. It had everybody scratching their heads. Me and my uncle were stunned. But there was nothing we could do. In La Cosa Nostra, the boss is the boss.
The once stable Bruno crime family was off to a rocky start, with new boss Philip Chicken Man Testa at the helm.
Almost immediately after he becomes the boss, true to his word, Phil Testa sends word to my uncle. He wants to make me, Salvie, Chucky and Lawrence formally induct us into La Cosa Nostra. He knows we have the Falcone trial coming up in a couple of months. He tells my uncle, if God forbid you don't win, I want these kids, meaning me and Lawrence, to be able to go to jail as men, meaning as made members.
Being initiated into La Cosa Nostra was the dream of every knockaround guy, every wannabe wise guy. For Philip Leonetti, it was about to become a reality.
From the moment we got arrested on the Falcone murder, my uncle was working on ways to beat the case. The first thing we did was put together our defense team. Harold Garber, who was around us and was very close with my uncle, would represent my uncle in the trial. I used Edwin Jacobs. Lawrence used a Philadelphia lawyer named Bobby Simone. Bobby made a name for himself representing a lot of made guys in Philadelphia. Him and my uncle had become friendly. Jury selection was set to begin early September 1980. I had moved into the Claridge Hotel and Casino during the trial, so I wouldn't be distracted. This trial meant everything to us. It was literally life or death for us. Now, when it comes time for opening arguments, Harold was the first to go. He was representing my uncle. He gets up and says, "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Harold Garber. I represent Nicodemo Scarfo. The evidence in this case will show that Mr. Scarfo is not guilty. Thank you." And then he sits down. That was his whole opening argument. If my uncle could have killed him right there, he would have. Ed Jacobs and Bobby Simone used their opening arguments to destroy the credibility of Joe Salerno, who was the state's star witness.
9 months removed from that fateful night in Margate, where Philip Leonetti pumped 2 bullets into Vincent Falcone, Joe Salerno and his family had already been whisked away from Brigantine and placed into the Witness Protection Program, relocated to Topeka, Kansas, where they were given new names, new identities. Now, wearing a bulletproof vest and under the guard of U.S. Marshals, carrying machine guns, Joe Salerno was back in town.
I remember when Joe Salerno took the witness stand. We were trying to ice him, trying to scare him. He never once looked in our direction. Not the whole fucking time he testified. And he was no less than 10 fucking feet away from us. The prosecutor had him tell the story of how he met us, how I had loaned him money, and how he had given my uncle the guns. The cocksucker told them everything. That night, we all went to dinner. Me, my uncle, Lawrence, Harold, Bobby, Ed Jacobs, and I think Chucky was with us. We went to Caesar's. We were discussing the best ways to attack Joe Salerno's credibility. We were all focused on winning this trial. It was as if nothing else was going on around us. Well, except for that thing with Johnny Keys.
Johnny Keys Simone had been a made member of the Bruno crime family for a number of years. He operated out of the Trenton, New Jersey area. Simone, who was 70 years old, was a distant cousin of Bruno's. He had formed a close relationship with the Gambino crime family in New York through a Trenton-based Gambino capo named Nicholas Nicky Russo. Russo, who reported directly to Gambino crime boss Paul Castellano, had been one of the Yardville Nine in the early 70s, with Angelo Bruno and Nicky Scarfo. Simone was sending messages to Castellano through Russo that he was interested in taking out Phil Testa and becoming boss of the Philadelphia mob, much in the same way Antonio Tony Bananas Caponigro had tried to do with Angelo Bruno. But Caponigro and Bruno were now both dead.
Word gets back to my uncle that Johnny Keys is plotting against Phil Testa, and is doing so through the Gambinos. My uncle reports this to Bobby Manna in New York. Bobby says he's going to look into it. A few days later, Bobby sends word down that he's sending a kid down named Sammy Gravano, who's with the Gambinos, to talk to us about it. He tells us we can trust him, that this Sammy is La Cosa Nostra, respected by all of the families in New York. And Sammy was known as a hitter, a killer. And Bobby says to my uncle and me, this guy, this is your kind of guy. So, one night, Sammy comes down. We meet him inside the lobby lounge at Bally's Park Place for a couple of drinks to get acquainted. We then take him to Angelo's for dinner. It's me, him, and my uncle. He tells us, I don't know this guy Johnny Keys. Quite frankly, I don't give a fuck. He's trying to make problems for you and your family. Then me and my crew, we're gonna make problems for him. I got the okay from Paul to whack this guy out for talking treason against your boss. Just give me some time, and it'll get done. Me and my crew, we're gonna handle this fuck. Personally. I could tell that my uncle was impressed by him, the manner in which he carried himself. He was very respectful, very straightforward. There was no bullshit with him. We ended up having a very nice dinner and spent a couple of hours talking about La Cosa Nostra. Sammy knew this thing, inside and out. That was the first time I met Sammy the Bull. It wouldn't be the last.
A few weeks later, the bullet-ridden body of Johnny Keys Simone was found in a Staten Island landfill. The hit team, led by the up-and-coming Gambino family hitman, Salvatore Sammy the Bull, Gravano, had kidnapped Simone from the parking lot of a posh country club on the outskirts of Trenton and drove him to a secluded area on Staten Island, where he pumped several bullets into the back of his head.
When we heard that Sammy's crew had killed Johnny Keys, we were relieved. It gave us the opportunity to focus our attention on our trial. Joe Salerno was telling the jury everything about the night we killed Vince. Every fucking detail. How I pulled out the gun, how I shot him, what I said. He gave the jury a play-by-play of everything that happened. I thought to myself, we're dead. We are fucked. When it was time for cross-examination, Harold and Ed Jacobs, they did a good job going after him. But Lawrence's fucking lawyer, Bobby Simone, fucking destroyed him. Bobby made Joe Salerno look like a fucking liar, even though every word out of his fucking mouth was the truth. Now, Joe Salerno is the state's whole case. If we're able to neutralize him, we have a shot at winning. After closing arguments, we're feeling real fucking good. Bobby was amazing. Harold waits until the end to tell me and my uncle that he knew one of the jurors, a guy who was a liquor salesman, and that the guy would not vote against us. So at best, Harold says, the jury would be hung. My uncle says, you knew this whole time? And it's now you tell us? This was the second time during the trial that my uncle looked like he wanted to kill Harold. I remember Bobby saying, is that why your opening argument was a mere 30 seconds? We all laughed, including my uncle. A few minutes later, they tell us that the jury had reached a unanimous verdict. We all stopped laughing. Everyone got serious. We thanked the lawyers, and they rushed off into the courtroom. Then me, my uncle, and Lawrence spoke privately for a few minutes. My uncle says, I think we're gonna beat this thing. We all hugged, kissed each other in the cheek. Then we went into the courtroom. It seemed like we were waiting forever for that fucking judge to come out and read the verdict. Then someone yells, all rise. And here comes the judge. You could cut the tension with a fucking knife. I'd never been more scared in my life. First, they read the charges off against Lawrence. Not guilty. Then they read my uncle's charges. Not guilty. Then they get to my name. Philip Leonetti. Not guilty. Me, my uncle, and Lawrence. We all shake hands. Shake hands with the lawyers. You should have seen the look on the faces of the prosecutor and the cops. They looked like they were gonna cry. It felt like the weight of the whole fucking world was off my shoulders. That night, we had a big party on Georgia Avenue, and everyone came to celebrate. All the lawyers with their families came. Chucky was there. The Blade was there. Saul Kane, Salvie, all the guys from the neighborhood, all the knockaround guys who were with us around Atlantic City. They all came down. At some point during the party, my uncle pulls me and Lawrence aside. He says to us, "We got away with murder. We were very, very lucky. We gotta be more careful from now on."
Within weeks of the not guilty verdict, little Nicky was back to his murderous ways.
Sindone was one of the guys who was involved in the plot to kill Ange. Him and my uncle hated each other. My uncle tells Phil Testa Sindone is a snake, that he can't be trusted. Phil Testa agrees, so we set him up. Salvie took him to a house in South Philly, where Frank Monte was waiting inside to see him. When Sindone is shaking hands with Frank Monte, Chucky Merlino shoots him in the head and kills him. Chucky hit him 3 times in the back of the head. They dumped him in an alley behind a store in South Philadelphia.
Phil Testa immediately sent word out that Sindone's entire operation was to be split between his killers, Salvie Testa, Chucky Merlino, and Frank Monte. Sindone's top lieutenant, Joseph Chicky Ciangalini, who was now aligned with Testa and Scarfo, would also receive a piece of the action and would oversee what remained of Sindone's crew. The year 1980 was almost over, but little Nicky's killing spree wasn't.
Sal's mother, Althea, was tall and blonde, with deep-set eyes, blue as the Aegean. She had the most classical bone structure of anyone I've ever known. A Roman aquiline nose, high chiseled cheekbones, and a strongly angled jaw. "So, what are you gonna do? Are you gonna marry him?" she asked me as she poured coffee for us both in her kitchen one day. "I don't know, Mrs. Testa. I love your son. I love him. He's my best friend. We share everything. We do everything together. But I'm a little afraid. A little scared. I mean, what kind of life will we have?" This was long before anyone had been murdered in the streets, exposed for all to see. Before any of us had any fear about what the future might hold, what horrors had yet to unfold. And yet, I was apprehensive. She says to me, "Look at me. Look at how I live. Look at my life. This would all be yours. I love him more than anything in this world. He's my son. But I love you too. You're only 23 years old, Rosina. You need to know. You don't come from this world. I didn't come from this world. My people were farmers down in Jersey. They sent me to live on 9th and Christian with my grandparents, so I could go to school. And then I met him. I met my husband. We were kids. And he was very persistent, much like Sal is with you. I didn't know what to make of it all. He was very charming, you know, flirty. And I fell. And then it was done. And now this is my life. And it is very hard. Harder than you'll ever know. Do you know how many times I've made dinner, working all day in this kitchen, and he comes downstairs, all dressed up. Darling, I'm sorry. I won't be here for dinner tonight. I've got something to do. And I'm left alone with the kids, Sal and Maria. When Maria was born, he was away. I delivered her on my own with my family around me. It wasn't easy. It still hurts. How many times have I made dinner only to have no one come home to eat it? No phone calls. No explanations. And you can't ask any questions. It's the life. This would be your life. This would be what you have to take. You have to believe and know that you can do it, and that it's not easy, no matter how much you think you love him.